For the office procedures, we want to start on a series of staff employees. And how important is this? Well, the employees are what's going to determine how much you can leverage your time and money. So if you never are good at knowing how to hire, train, manage employees, you're never going to be able to leverage your time. What does that mean? You're going to have a seriously reduced income. Your income is going to be only reduced to what you can do by yourself. That's it. So knowing how to hire, pick, train, and motivate and keep staff is a huge, and it's typically a real big problem with chiropractors because they've never been trained in anything about employees. So I'm going to share with you what I learned. And of course, I had to study a lot. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you is experience. Again, I've opened 77 offices in 20 states. We typically had at least 2 employees per office. So I've had to interview and deal with just thousands of people. And so after dealing with and interviewing thousands of people, we kind of have a really good idea of what works best and what doesn't. And so I'm going to share all those best practices with you so it can help to eliminate turnover. First of all, you want to stop turnover because it just kills growth. And it takes an average of 6 months to train a good employee. Now, not the majors. You can train the majors, within 10 days to 2 weeks, how to answer the phone, how to schedule appointments, how to process the patient, day 1 through 10. But to be a really good staff member and know all the intricacies and be really solid, it takes about 6 months. And that's why you do not want to go through employees. You want stability in your positions. And you need what's called anchor positions. You're not going to be able to grow a business with part-time people. So you have to have anchor positions. In other words, real stable, responsible people in certain positions. Now, the typical chiropractic office has the front desk person and then the back person that helps with therapy. A lot of times we use that person to help with marketing. And so a typical good, really high productive office really only needs 2 really good, responsible people. And then you can easily have part-time people to start with billing. You can have part-time people help move patients through during the industrial hours. So now you can have part-time people, but you can't have part-time people in anchor positions to grow a business. It just doesn't work that way. And I'd like to make a comment about AI, artificial intelligence, and what its capacity is and isn't. And so you have to know when to use the tool and how to use the tool. Well, you can use AI to answer phones, schedule appointments, stuff like that, and you can automate collecting money. But what you can't automate is proactivity. So we not only hire employees to process, but our employees, the way we train them, are used to help increase the business, not just process business. And that's not going to happen with AI. And you need to know the difference. So AI will definitely help leverage time better to even help increase the employee's productivity. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. What are some areas? But you're not going to get an AI person to help create another 10, 20, 30, 40 new patients a month with your marketing. AI person's not going to do that. And then same with the front desk, being proactive. AI is not going to be proactive. AI is just going to process what some of the tasks you do have. And you got to be a little concerned about that. I walked into a chiropractor's office recently and they had on the counter and they said, hey, our office is now being run by AI. Our receptionist is AI. Well, that's not from chiropractors who were kicking butt. That's from chiropractors who were just trying to get by. It was 2 chiropractors sharing space. They were individuals. So why were they sharing space? To save money and overhead. Why were they using an AI receptionist? To save money. So they weren't going from a position of strength. They were going from a position of weakness. Neither of them was doing very well. And for either of them to do okay, they had to split the overhead and minimize the overhead. So if each of them was seeing 40 to 60 visits a week, and that's what they were doing, they were seeing about 60 visits a week. Well, on their own, they'd be in trouble. But when they're splitting the overhead with the other doctor, and then they leveraged off, so they have no labor, they've got no labor cost. So really the only cost they have. Now, if you want to play low ball, then that's a really good way to do it. If you want to play low ball, you want low stress and low overhead, and that's one way to definitely do it. But that's playing low ball. That's not going after, $500,000, $1 million a year. That's just kind of getting by with low overhead because you're not a high producer. That's what that is. And that's what they were doing. So anyway, there's a big difference there. So just be aware of it. Nothing can replace the productivity of a human being being proactive with another human being, whether it's getting new patients or keeping new patients. That's like AI can help with keeping patients, but it's still got to be the doctor. The doctor's the source. Now, I can help with marketing, and there's some things that just flat out can't do. It's not going to create a referral like a trained person. I can train a staff member to create a referral, and in one day, she can get 1, 2, or 3 referrals. AI is not going to do that. Okay. It'll just help process systems, essentially what it does. So be real clear about the difference in that also. So we're going to go into the employee, and but that's where it's at, when it comes to proactive stuff. Proactive, you want human beings. Processing stuff, yeah, you can move that to part-time or AI. That's kind of how you want to think of it. Proactive versus processing. That's how you want to think of it. Okay, having said that, in other words, what I have been able to see, like in my office, we would see about 350 patient visits a week. I had 2 full-time associate doctors. Could that have been run with AI? There's no way. There's absolutely no way that could have been run with AI. And I never would have attained that amount of productivity with AI. Okay. Okay. So anyway, having said that, so we're going to spend the next several segments on a lot of the different categories of employees, how to hire, how to train, how to manage. There's a lot of different categories with employees, and we're going to cover all of them individually. So it'll take several segments to get through them. So let's start going through some of these major categories and segments. And it's basically how to create like the super warrior chiropractic assistant. How to hire them, how to train them, how to manage them. In other words, your staff, if you're not aware of this yet, your staff members should easily produce 3 times their income. So whatever you're paying a staff member, when they leverage time, that's what staff members are for, is leveraging your time to where the doctor, can see more patients, make more money. A staff member's wages should not be thought of as extra expenses. They should increase as a minimum 3-fold their income. So if you're paying a staff member, let's say $40,000, they should easily, through our training, through our systems, through productivity, should easily help increase the income of the business $120,000. That's minimum. Okay. And some staff members are way more valuable when it comes to productivity than others. That's like the staff member we teach how to do the marketing. Well, that staff member is going to create a lot of referrals. They're going to create a lot of attorney presentations. Well, that staff member could be worth like $1 million when you start talking about all the potential personal injury referrals, patient referrals. Okay. So they don't carry the same weight. But the point is as a bare minimum, and that's even if you like one doctor, and then that's seeing like 40, 60 visits a week, and then he's stuck because he's stuck doing everything. He doesn't have any more time to do anything. So the very next thing, he has to hire a staff member to leverage time. Well, you don't need to think about it as, well, that's going to cost me. No, when you hire that staff member, that should take you up to about 120, 130 visits a week. So you should have gone from 60 to 120. You should have been able to double your practice from just that one staff member. So we're talking about, let's do a little math here and go, if you're going to double 60 visits, and let's just say it's a $50 per visit, 52 weeks in a year, that's $156,000. And you've maybe paid her 30, 40, or 50,000. See, that's easily a threefold easily. And that's with a $50 per visit. Okay. So that's how you have to think of it, is they're leveraging up. All your staff members should be leveraging whatever their income is, a minimum of threefold. Now, in the beginning, it won't. In the beginning, they'll be a little more costly until they actually, like you're seeing, if you're seeing 60 visits a week and you go and hire your first person, yeah, initially the first few weeks, it's going to cost you a little more until your business starts coming up to break even from that expense and then go past that labor expense. And generally speaking, and I'll just share this with you, what are the average patient visits with staff? Well, there's some serious variables involved. First variable is the efficiency of the doctor. I just stepped in a doctor's office the other day, and it took him 40 minutes to process a new patient. I was sitting there for 40 minutes. I'm like, he's not going to have, and this was during industrial hours. This was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, guess how many patients he's going to be seeing if it takes him 40 minutes to process a new patient during industrial hours? It's going to be very limiting, very limiting. And it's going to be because of him. So the first person that affects your productivity, but through leverage of time, is the doctor. How much skill and knowledge does the doctor have? Okay, I could process a new patient in 7 minutes and hit all the majors. Now, I might not hit all the minors, but I'll hit all the majors, and I'll be able to move to the next new patient or see another 3 or 4 new patients with nobody waiting. That's from efficiency and knowledge, instead of being stuck in a room for 40 minutes. So it all starts with a doctor's knowledge, skill, and efficiency. That's where the volume comes in first. But let's say that the doctor has good efficiency. Most doctors can see up to about 60 visits a week by themselves before it's overwhelming. They're answering the phone, they're dealing with patients, scheduling done, they're collecting money. Okay. Now, when you hire the first employee, one employee should be able to take you up to about 120, 130 visits a week. The next major factor is going to be, what are you doing? What therapeutics are you doing? What's your layout? Well, if you're not doing any therapies, you could have one staff member and that's it. And to max the doctor out. In other words, most doctors can only see about 180 to 220 visits a week. One staff member with no therapies, that's all you need for that. Or if you have unattended therapies, that significantly increases the efficiency. In other words, we'll have an unattended therapy. We'll train the patient how to do it. So we'll take 1 or 2 visits, or no more than 3 visits, to train the patient how to do the therapy. Well, that doesn't cost much labor at all. The doctor can easily train them in 1, 2, or 3 visits. And every time they come in, it's not taking any labor now. And the good news is the revenue goes up. So that's the good news about unattended therapies. And especially if it's in a open bay, because you can always see more patients in an open room versus individual rooms. That's like the worst. And I was in another doctor's office the other day. He had the absolute worst setup. He had individual rooms, individual therapies. He had attended therapies, and he was doing hot packs. What a nightmare to do the labor involved with hot packs is unbelievably. And there's no revenue. There's little to no revenue involved with a hot pack. It's one of the worst things a doctor can do in his office, to just waste time and money. Same with a cold pack. It's a lot of labor getting the cold pack out, wrapping it up, moistening it, wrapping it up, putting it on the patient, taking it off the patient, putting it back in, putting that cold pack up so it airs out for the next patient. See, that's what happens with the hot pack and cold pack. Those are 1950 therapies, and they can do those at home. And remember, you should be never doing a therapy in your office you don't get paid for anyway. So these are just some examples. So if you're doing unattended therapies, you can see a lot more patients with one. You can max out yourself with one staff member. Matter of fact, you could have 2 doctors and 3 doctors. because the doctors is training the patients over 1, 2, or 3 visits how to do the unattended therapies. And then you want the therapy bay. That saves a lot of space, a lot of efficiency, and it saves a lot with space and overhead when it's a big bay versus individual rooms. So that's why I say it's not clean cut. How efficient is the doctor? What's the layout with a bay versus individual rooms? What types of therapy is the doctor using? Attended or unattended? See, all of these will factor into how much labor you need. What's going to be the cost of your labor? So that's what you're going to be paying attention to. Some of the most efficient offices are open layouts, unattended rehab therapies. Those are the highest cost therapies. Unattended rehab therapies that are just trained in with 1 staff member. And then add another doctor to that scenario, a second doctor or 2, like you have 1 associate doctor or 2 associate doctors. Like in my case, I had 2 associate doctors. You talk about an unbelievable ratio of income to labor. Generally speaking, labor's about 13 to 15% of gross collections of a chiropractic office. It's the single largest expense, labor. The next largest expense is space. And so that's why we pay a lot of attention to space, laying out the space right, because we want the least amount of space, because space leads to the largest overhead. You go to fill it with crap. So it's real important that we lay the space out properly. And so there's 3 different layouts. Individual rooms are the worst. They take the most time and money and cost. Hybrid rooms, so if you have a therapy bay for therapy and then individual rooms for the adjustments, is the second best of leverage of time and money. And then the absolute best is a therapy bay and adjusting area. That's the least amount of space, highest productivity, highest efficiency, highest revenue, lowest labor, especially if you're doing unattended therapies. So if you have 1 associate doctor or 2 associate doctors, unattended therapies, you could see 300-400 visits a week with 1 staff member. That's how that can work. Okay. Now, depends on what kind of billing you're doing. The worst kind of billing that takes the most time and energy is major medical insurance or even Medicare. That's what takes so long. And the billing is not what takes the time. It's easy to put in the data and hit submit. That's easy. Like personal injury billing, it's easy. You put in the data, hit submit, they pay the bill. That's how it works. It's not that way in major medical. Most of the labor is in the follow-up. That's where all the labor costs are with billing. Okay. So again, it depends, how much major medical you have in your facility. That's going to base it on labor. And unfortunately, you never want to send it out, because as soon as you send it out, whoever you send it out to is going to get paid. They're going to get paid like on a percentage of what they collect. Well, they're not going to want to be on the phone for 40 minutes waiting to talk to somebody. That's 40 minutes of just dead time and no productivity, see? So those are the offices that always go down real fast, is when they turn their collections over to a billing agency, because they don't care. They just hit submit, 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 and they just keep they get paid. And what doesn't pay, they just write it off. So you run into big, big accounts receivable problems when you hand off your billing and collections to a third party when it's major medical, like major medical or Medicare, because all the labor's in the follow-up, and they're not going to do the follow-up. That's the bottom line. Personal injury is easy. You can hire, a high school senior part-time to bill that. That is not difficult at all. Okay, so these are some of again, your labor, your space, all that. These are the factors that determine how much labor you need. What's your layout? What's the doctor's efficiency? So generally, it's 1 doctor up to about 60 visits until he's too busy. You hire a first staff member. Well, now it really depends on your doctor's efficiency, individual rooms for the treatment, therapy bay for the individual rooms or therapy bay, attended versus unattended therapy, you see? And then what percentage of your patient of your practice is major medical Medicare, because that's high labor intensive billing. So these are going to be the variables on how much business you'll be able to see before you need to buy more labor. Okay, but generally speaking, so I'm just laying these scenarios out so you can see the worst. So again, let me give you the worst scenario and the best scenario. So it's crystal clear. So what's the worst scenario for labor cost? Staff. You have individual rooms. First of all, the doctor's not very good. He's not very efficient with managing his time with patients. That's where it all starts right there. And then you go, is it individual rooms? Are the adjustments in individual rooms? Takes way much more time getting in and out of rooms than if they were open, if it was in an open adjusting area. You can go from patient to patient way faster in an open adjusting area. And most of it has to do with the patient just capturing your time. When you're in an individual room, it's real easy for them to hold you. When you're in an open adjusting area, it's a lot harder for them to hold you because they see somebody else is waiting. And that's why it's the highest efficiency is when you have an open adjusting area. And then the medium is, so if you have individual rooms with an open therapy bay. So the worst case scenario, doctors, bad efficiency, 1, 2. Individual rooms for the adjusting, 3. Individual rooms for the therapy, 4. Attended therapies, ultrasound, muscle stim, hot packs, cold packs. Those are called attended therapies. They take the most time and effort and they pay the least. And if you have a higher percentage of major medical insurance and Medicare, that's your absolute worst labor situation. Let's come across to the best labor situation, best profit situation, lowest labor cost. Doctors highly efficient, open adjusting area that moves patients fast, saves a lot of space and labor. Open therapy bay saves a lot of increases productivity significantly. Active therapies, more active therapies than passive therapies. You get paid more and it's easy to train the patient. Active therapies is whether it's like a wobble board, like a pinnacle cervical traction or TheraBands. We can just teach them how to do it in 2 or 3 visits. And from then on, they can just do it on their own. And they're monitored within the office, but it doesn't take labor. Some of the nightmare labor scenarios I've seen are these traction machines, these disc decompression machines. That's a huge amount of labor it takes for somebody to put them on. Matter of fact, I was in an office the other day. I couldn't believe the labor cost. The doctor was chiropractic biophysics. And if you know much about that, they all have these individual machines and they are like very unique with trying to change curves of the spine. You talk about an unbelievable amount of labor and time it takes to put that patient on and take them off. That doctor had four staff members just to put patients on and off. Not that because he was seeing a lot, it took a lot of labor to put these people on and take them off. I go, my God, he had terrible space. I'm going, this is a nightmare. He had to have a lot of space for those machines. They were big machines. They were costly. They took a lot of time and a lot of labor. I'm sitting here going, I want nothing to do with that. But I don't know if he knew that before he went into it. Okay, so what's the best scenario? Efficiency of the doctor, 1. 2, open adjusting area. 3, open therapy area. Unattended therapies. A higher percentage of cash or personal injury and a lower percentage of major medical and Medicare for billing. That's the highest. And then you really want to max out, bring on your first associate doctor and a second associate doctor, because they will not need any labor. Say, now you have unbelievable ratios of productivity collections relative to labor. One person can literally run that whole office. If it was minimal major medical, minimal Medicare, or if there was none, one person could do that. And then you can easily hire a part-time person to do the billing for the personal injury if they were doing that. And it only takes a part-time person to do that for a lot of patients. That is not a full-time job. Even if you're seeing 500 visits a week, that is not a full-time job billing and collecting personal injury. Now, if you were doing major medical, it definitely is. And it's because of the follow-up, not because of the billing. That's when it all gets messed. It gets messy when you're doing all the follow-up for major medical and Medicare. The billing is not the time consuming. So that's the best scenario. That's like the worst and best scenario for profitability and labor. Okay. Having said that, let's go through some major characteristics. And here's the bottom line. You're either going to learn how to pick the right person. And it took a while for me to learn this, that you're going to pick the person and that's going to be the deal. You're either going to pick a good person, and I'm going to go through some of the qualifiers of what a good person is. You're either going to start to learn how to pick good people, or you're going to have a really hard time with staff because you can't change people. So you've got to know these qualifiers and use these qualifiers, because if you use these qualifiers, you'll automatically get a good person. And when you get a good person, it is so much easier to deal with. You get a wrong person, it's a nightmare. Usually the nightmare goes on for several months. The doctor doesn't realize it because they're not experienced. They think they can just train them. Nope. You're about to see the difference it makes when you pick the right person. And I do this with associate doctors all the time. A lot of the success of the associate doctor, 99% starts with the doctor himself. Did I pick the right person? That's where 99% of your success is going to be with staff members. Did you pick the right person? So you've got to learn the characteristics of how to pick the right person. You don't pick the right person, you're going to have a nightmare on your hands. And usually the doctor he thinks he can train them. It goes on. And the doctor, especially if the doctor's younger and not experienced with hiring staff, he doesn't want to let the staff member go. Thinks, oh, he doesn't feel good about firing somebody. And then it drags on for 6 months, 9 months, and then eventually it just doesn't work out. And I see this all the time when I do seminars and doctors bring their staff members. I can literally tell in 10 minutes, no more than 15 minutes, if that's going to work out or not. And all the time I go, that doctor picked the wrong person. He didn't even know he picked the wrong person. I do this all the time. And again, that's from experience, but also it's this flow chart. So I'm going to share with you this checklist. And the more you violate this checklist, the more likely you're going to have trouble with staff. And the more you can nail this checklist, you have an unbelievable high probability of having a very good employee. Let's go into the checklist.